Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Coming at you today with a slightly different video, but it is a video that I feel is keeping itself somewhat within the Halloween season. As I'm sure many of you have noticed by now, a big recurring topic on this channel has been the Universal monsters. But today I wanted to give a little love to a particular Universal monster title that I feel over the years has gotten a little bit of the shaft. It's the fourth entry in a particular line of Universal monster films. And of course, when you get to the fourth film in any franchise, I mean, obviously there's going to be certain liberties that are going to be taken by that point to keep everything entertaining and up to date, if you will. And they're all risky choices, and sometimes they pay off and sometimes they don't, and a lot of times they don't pay off. But for the film that I want to talk about today, I want to give a little appreciation to 1942's The Ghost of Frankenstein. That film is the fourth in the original line of Frankenstein films produced by Universal between the 1930s and 1940s. The first, of course, being the original Frankenstein film from 1931, followed by the equally entertaining Bride of Frankenstein, a film that is often considered by many to be far superior to its predecessor, and then we had Son of Frankenstein in 1939. Now, both the original film and Bride of Frankenstein were produced during the Laemmle era of Universal Studios. Laemmle, of course, referring to Carl Laemmle Sr., who was the founder of the studio, followed by his son, Carl Jr., who took over the studio in the late 20s. And it was really because of Carl Jr. that the studio became synonymous with horror pictures in the 1930s, because he had a very strong interest in the macabre and mystery and really wanted to do films of that type, which is what led to the production of Dracula and then Frankenstein. Then later we got films like The Mummy, The Invisible Man, of course, Bride of Frankenstein, but we also had films like The Black Cat, The Raven, Werewolf of London, Dracula's Daughter, the list goes on. But by 1936, 1937, the studio was in great financial trouble, which eventually led to the Laemmles being bought out. And it was really during the second era of the studio, if you will, that we saw their cycle of horror films continue, beginning with Son of Frankenstein in 1939. Now, in the first three Frankenstein films, the actor who portrayed the Frankenstein monster was none other than the great Boris Karloff. But Son of Frankenstein also introduced the character of Igor, played by Bela Lugosi. And it's really Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Igor that is the true highlight of that movie. It's the kind of role where, like, if you only associate Bela Lugosi as Dracula and you think that's really all he had to give in those days, watch his performance of Igor. It'll definitely change your perception of him as an actor. It just goes to show you that if you gave him the right parts and the right script and just allowed him to make that part his own, he could really dish out a really decent performance. And the character of Igor is so different from the character of Dracula that it's almost hard to separate the fact that these are both played by the same actor. Especially during a time when Lugosi's career was sort of on the downfall, if you will, because he was really struggling with his career at this point. He was really being held back by typecasting, and he was also in the midst of a drug addiction at the time, and it was just becoming harder and harder for him to get decent roles and for the studios to want to take him seriously. But they gave him the character of Igor in Son of Frankenstein, and he easily took the film away with him with that performance. Even more so than Karloff as the monster, which is sort of ironic if you think about it, because they originally wanted Bela Lugosi to play the monster in the original Frankenstein film, but due to whatever version of the story you want to hear as to why he didn't do it, the role ultimately went to Boris Karloff, and that basically just kick-started his career because he was a virtually unknown actor at the time. Now, style-wise, I think Son of Frankenstein isn't necessarily as good as the first two films. It's a good film. I mean, I definitely appreciate it more in recent years. We also got to keep in mind the first two films were directed by James Whale, who did not return for the third film or any subsequent Frankenstein film for that matter. So I guess you could argue the touch that he gave those first two films is definitely somewhat lacking in the third film. Colin Clive, who played Dr. Frankenstein in the original film, sadly had passed away by this point at the very young age of 37, unfortunately. But taking on the title role in that film is Basil Rathbone, the actor who to most film buffs is probably recognized for playing Sherlock Holmes, and he gives a very decent performance in that film. I know there's been people out there who feel it's a little too shrill, it's a little too over the top. I actually think it's a pretty decent performance. I mean, especially when you see the circumstances that he puts himself in throughout the film. He has a whole community of people who are just keeping a close eye on him, just suspicious of him the whole time. So, I mean, the character is sort of on edge for a good chunk of the movie, which I think he gives with his performance. Maybe I'm just being a little too kind to him, but I think he gave a relatively decent performance for that film and gave the role what it needed. But Son of Frankenstein was a commercial success. It was also the last Frankenstein film that was produced on like a big budget, because we would essentially be entering the era now where the studios were going to be producing these for as fast and as cheaply as they could by reusing the same actors, same sets, same music, same script writers, same producers, you name it. And that became a staple for these films for pretty much the first half of the 1940s. But you also got to keep in mind, we're also talking about an era where it was easy to get away with those things. We didn't have things like binge watching in those days. It's not like if the next Frankenstein film was going to come out, you can just say, hey, let's sit and watch them all together so that way we can prepare ourselves for the next film. That wasn't a thing yet. This is the 1940s we're talking about. So with that, it was easy for them to just recycle actors and sets and everything and just produce these for as cheaply as possible and have the continuity of the stories take the backseat, if you will. Which brings us over to 1942, where we got the fourth entry of the Frankenstein films, which was The Ghost of Frankenstein. This is a significant entry in a few ways. It is the first of the Frankenstein films to not feature Boris Karloff Karloff as the monster. He more or less had made a conscious decision after doing Son of Frankenstein that he was just not going to play the role anymore. He just felt there wasn't much left of the character to explore. He felt the character was becoming more of a background prop, which if you go back and watch Son of Frankenstein, there was definitely scenes in that film where the monster is just comatose, strapped to the table and not really doing anything. And it just felt that the character was becoming less of the presence that he had made in the first two films. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure around the time that Ghost of Frankenstein was in production, that was around the time that Karloff was doing the stage version of Arsenic and Old Lace. So either way, he wasn't going to be able to come back. But Ghost of Frankenstein went into production shortly after they had just released The Wolfman. And the title role in that film was played by none other than Lon Chaney Jr. And I think it was really his role in that film that kind of convinced the studio that, hey, we can sort of mold this guy into our new big horror star, if you will. Especially when you take into consideration his father, Lon Chaney Sr., the man of 1,000 faces, had great success for the studio back in the 1920s. So it seems somewhat of a logical choice to cast Lon Chaney Jr. as the role of the monster this time. But even Chaney wasn't the only carryover from The Wolfman. Bela Lugosi, who played Bela the Gypsy in The Wolfman, comes back for this film to reprise his role as Igor. Evelyn Ankers, who was the leading lady in The Wolfman, is now the leading lady in this film. Ralph Bellamy played a policeman in The Wolfman. He plays a policeman in this film. In fact, Talbot Castle in The Wolfman is also the castle that's used for Frankenstein's chateau in this film. When you see the opening credits, the background is the forest set from The Wolfman. A lot of the musical cues we hear in the film are carryovers from The Wolfman. George Wagner, who was the producer and director on The Wolfman, is the producer on this film. So yes, a lot of production carryovers from The Wolfman have been brought over to The Ghost of Frankenstein. But we have other people as well. We have Cedric Hardwicke, who plays the second son of Dr. Frankenstein in this film. And we also have Lionel Atwill in the role of Frankenstein's colleague, Dr. Bulmer. He had actually played the role of the police inspector with the fake arm in Son of Frankenstein. So yeah, definitely some nice highlights of this film, at least from a production standpoint. But story-wise, we are reaching a point in the series where the continuity is going to be taking a major backseat in favor of the more important elements that the studio thought they needed to push to bring the film to the screen. Like I said, in this film, Cedric Hardwicke plays the role of Frankenstein's second son. Yet if you go back and watch the first two films, it was never established that Frankenstein had any kids, let alone two. So if you really think about it, it's really Son of Frankenstein that starts to introduce the major continuity issues that we would begin to see throughout these films. And sadly, films like Ghost of Frankenstein would further be an extension of that. The character of Igor mentions that he was acquainted with the original Dr. Frankenstein, yet there's very little, if not anything, to really establish that in the first two movies. See, it's just like little plot elements like that where you just sort of have to say to yourself, well, you know what, they weren't really thinking about continuity so much in those days. It's more for the thrills, it's more about just getting a Frankenstein film to the big screen to bring the big bad monster back and just have a whole plot revolve around that, which I can understand and I can sort of forgive it for. But there's a couple other highlights of this film. This is also the last Frankenstein film of those original films to just solely focus on Frankenstein. After this film, we get Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which is basically the beginning of the cycle of films that are basically just focusing on multiple monsters at the same time and not really giving them their own individual stories anymore. Which, if you were to ask me as a fan, I feel that was something that was both an asset and a setback with those films. It felt like three individual storylines that were just sort of working away from each other and not so much bringing them together, which I felt would have helped those films a little more. So keeping that in mind, Ghost of Frankenstein is actually one of the last of the Frankenstein films in which the monster plays a major role. Because after that, we basically see the Frankenstein monster being downgraded to the role that Boris Karloff basically saw the role becoming after he played him in Son of Frankenstein. Just something that is just sort of strapped to the table in the background, not really doing anything. I mean, he might have a scene where he breaks free and maybe just runs amok for a couple minutes, but that's about it. He's not really becoming a full-fleshed character at that point. Another thing is, this is also, believe it or not, the very first of the original Frankenstein films in which we physically see a bolt of lightning strike the monster. In the original film, they bring the table to the top and they just focus on the underview of the table until they bring it back down and then the monster is alive, but we never get that establishing shot of the lightning actually striking him. And pretty much the same thing with the films that follow. So you can also view this as a film in terms of an upgrade in effects. When you look at the earlier films, the effects are a little more primitive, especially when you take into consideration that both Dracula and Frankenstein were not so much adaptations of their source materials, but more adaptations of the play adaptations that were produced back in the 20s. So those films were basically being made that were using source material that was designed more for the stage. But by the time you jump to the 40s, we're now in an era where they're really just trying to up the thrill, so therefore you gotta kind of up the effects as well. And that would include finally getting us an establishing shot of lightning actually physically striking the monster. Now this is a film that not only in the Frankenstein series of movies, but just in I think the whole Universal horror cycle in general, has gotten some flack over the years. I've seen people say it's boring, it's just not as entertaining as the earlier films. Chaney is definitely nowhere near the caliber of Boris Karloff to be playing the Frankenstein monster. Some people even feel that the character of Igor in this film is not even as interesting as he was in Son of Frankenstein. It wouldn't even surprise me if some people feel that this is when the series somewhat jumped the shark because we have the twist of Igor's brain going into the monster's head and now at the end he speaks with Igor's voice. So yes, yes, this film contrasts very heavily with its predecessors. But what are my personal opinions on it? I personally have a great love and appreciation for this film, and I think that's only built more so over the years. I can admit that some of that love had to be earned over the years. Like when I was a kid, I had mixed emotions about it. Like case in point, this is my original VHS copy, which as you can see, it's pretty beat up, but don't let the condition of this cover fool you. Growing up, this was a film that I only sporadically watched. I would even argue that it was during the DVD era that I really started to appreciate this film even more, and it was this DVD, the double feature DVD of Ghost of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein, which trivia, this was actually, if my memory serves me correct, the very first Universal Monster DVD I actually owned. Not by choice, my dad just got this as like a Christmas gift for me one year, but I think it was really more so of revisiting this film on this DVD when I was around the age of like maybe 11 or 12 that I really started to appreciate it more. And I think that brings up another irony. I think my opinion of the film when I was a kid syncs up more to the opinions that people have for that film now as adults. It doesn't have Karloff, the story is it just doesn't feel it was made in the same spirit of the earlier films. It doesn't have the expressionistic feel of those first three movies. I mean, the list goes on. And when I look back at the film when I was watching it in my childhood years, that probably would have been more or less my opinion as well. Now, sure, some of those opinions have stayed with me. I definitely don't think Chaney's monster is as good as the Karloff monster. That being said, I prefer Chaney's monster over some of the people who came after him. I prefer Chaney's monster way better than I prefer Lugosi's monster in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. But in Lugosi's defense, some of what I didn't like about his performance isn't exactly his fault, because originally Lugosi played the role as a speaking role, but the dialogue got cut before the movie came out, and unfortunately that just sort of retroactively damaged his performance. Because there were certain plot points, including the fact that the character was blind at that point, which explains the iconic monster walking like this, which unfortunately just left him with a very incoherent take on that character. And then unfortunately I feel like Glenn Strange's monster just really wasn't given enough to do for me to really justify whether I like his take or not. But with what Chaney had to do, I mean, yes, he doesn't growl or grunt like the Karloff monster does, but I feel like he still gave a sense of pathos to the character, which I felt was something that was somewhat lacking with the character in Son of Frankenstein. I felt the monster had become somewhat more of like a henchman in that film, whereas I feel like in this film, the monster has sort of reclaimed some sense of independence. In Son of Frankenstein, he was basically doing everything and anything to please Igor, whereas in this film, we actually get scenes where he's actually acting against Igor, which sort of illustrates that he's becoming aware of how much of a manipulating person that Igor is. So I do think that there are certain elements of the story and these characters that they do bring out a little bit in this film that I do think get overlooked. So yes, I'm not going to say I necessarily rank this film with the original Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein, but as a fun early to mid 1940s horror flick that's also the fourth film in an ongoing series of movies, I still frankly find it entertaining. I would definitely rather sit and watch this film more than Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman personally. I definitely prefer it to the two House films. I'm in the minority that actually likes Igor's performance in this film more than Son of Frankenstein. I practically find myself quoting Igor in this film every time I watch it. The lightning, it is good for you. Turn on the gas! You will see to it that the brain of Catherine does not go into the head of the monster. He's as much the highlight of this movie as he was the highlight of Son of Frankenstein. I like the set. I do like that they reused that house from the Wolfman because it is a nice looking house and it fits the aesthetic of the film in my opinion. It has a great opening scene. Like the opening scene almost feels like the climax of the film because you have an angry mob coming to storm the castle and blow it up with Igor still inside. Like this feels like this should be at the end of the movie, not the beginning. So I do sort of give this film sort of a bit of credit in that area. I love the music in this film. They reuse a few cues from the Wolfman throughout the film, but not too much. Every time the opening credits rolls along, I hum along to it. So yes, while I could argue that it's not one of the stronger Frankenstein films, I definitely don't think that degrades it as an entertaining film. And I love this cover too. This is actually one of my favorite covers from that Universal Monsters video collection that came out in the 90s. And just a quick little tidbit with that real quick. Let me show you something. Now, I grew up in the South Jersey area, and there used to be a shop in Smithville that sold like toy cars, like display toy cars. But in that little shop, I remember they had this. This is a replica of the Monte Carlo driven by race car driver Terry Labonte, which as you can see has the image of Lon Chaney Jr. as the Frankenstein monster there. Now, as a kid, I wanted this car really bad. For no other reason than the fact that it had Frankenstein on it. But part of the reason why this car is so significant with me and my love for the Ghost of Frankenstein, not only because it has the image of Chaney as the monster from that film, I saw this image of the monster on that car before I even knew Ghost of Frankenstein was even a movie. I just thought this was just some random image image of the Frankenstein monster. It could be anybody, it could be some stock actor. Maybe they couldn't use Karloff's likeness because of licensing or whatever. But nonetheless, I didn't care. I just thought, it's the Frankenstein car, I want that. So the first time I saw this cover was out at what was at the time the Ocean One Mall in Atlantic City. They had a video store out there and I saw this cover and I thought, wow, is that where that image is from? I had no idea that that image was from a movie. That reason alone was enough to make me want to get this film at the time. Not to mention the fact that it was yet another title in that Universal Monsters video collection, which I was collecting at the time. I thought, hey, that's another one that I need to add to the collection. So anyway, just a little childhood tidbit there for you. So anyways, I still have fun with this film. Chaney isn't great as the monster, but he's good. Lugosi gives another knockout performance as Igor, in my opinion. I'm not saying this is of the top tier quality of the earlier films, but for what it is, I still have fun with it. This is the point in the franchise where you just have to go in for the fun of it. Not take it seriously. Understand that they were going more for the thrills than the continuity. Some of the plot lines are batshit crazy, but that's part of the fun of it. Is it the best Frankenstein film ever made? I wouldn't say that. Is it one of the funner ones ever made? I could possibly agree with that. Do I think it deserves a lot of the flack it gets? Not all of it. It's just a film that I watch for the fun of it, and I just have developed a deep love of it in recent years. I love the music. I love the atmosphere of it. I have definitely come to accept this as one of the more misunderstood entries in the original Universal Monsters cycle. So I'll kind of end it here. I figured I would just do a little bit of a review of that movie and give a little bit of a defense in terms of why I feel it's a bit of an overlooked entry in that cycle. But what do you think? Have you seen the film? Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Why? Why not? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, it's spooky season. I'm hoping to have one more video out before Halloween hits us. It's probably going to be posted on Halloween. But anyways, happy spooky season. Thank you as always for watching. I appreciate you all. Take care out there and stay safe.